The Jewish Alexandrian philosopher Philo lived in the first half of the first century of the Common Era, AD or CE. And he composed a very large book, or several books that we still have, actually, amazingly. And in these pages is practically every concept that you can find within Christianity, including, highly significantly, what is called the Logos, or the Word, which was an interesting, Philo's conception was interesting because he combined Greek philosophy. The Logos had been previously fleshed out or philosophized upon by Plato, and he took that and he combined it with Judaism. So already we have a kind of Hellenized, or I should say a Judaized Logos in Philo. And the important thing about Philo is also not only did he have these sort of pre-Christian concepts, and he was a Jewish person who was living in Alexandria, which is about 200 miles as the crow flies from Jerusalem. Even though he was writing about the Logos or the Word during this time, this very time period when Christ supposedly was walking around in Judea, he does not mention Jesus, Christians, Christianity. He never says a word that, well, gosh, I'm writing about this Logos and he suddenly showed up in my very homeland. So he's a very important figure. And on top of that, he was from an extremely wealthy family. And this is important because you have to follow the money when you're looking at major trends, paradigms, new paradigms being set. And if you look at his family, then you start seeing, well, this is interesting because now we're starting to come across the Flavians again. In fact, he was very involved with, or his relatives were very involved with the Flavians. So Philo was a key figure in the creation of Christianity, but not directly as someone from whom Christianity drew. Philo also discusses a group of people living in Alexandria, outside of Alexandria at Lake Mareotis, called the Therapeutes. And we find out, if we fast forward, we find out from the church historian Eusebius that the Therapeutes' short allegorical writings were the basis of the Christian Gospels. So that whole area is where we want to look very closely for the Christian origins. The Therapeutes were a sort of monkish community outside of Alexandria. They were very isolated. But then you discover that there's a whole, the word therapeute, as you can imagine, like from therapeutic, has a connotation of healer about it. And so there seems to have been a very widespread healing guild all around the Mediterranean. In fact, possibly in some of the very places that are addressed in the Pauline epistles, in like Corinth and other parts of the Mediterranean area. And so you have an impression of this healing guild that is possibly headquartered at Alexandria or loosely connected somehow, but the Alexandrian community according to Philo, had an interesting structure that was essentially what we find in Christianity later. We have presbyters and sort of like bishops and other ranks within that really resembles the Catholic Church or monkish communities, Christian monkish communities. And they celebrated certain holidays like Pentecost that were inherited by Christianity. I'm not sure about what exact Easter celebrations, but of course Easter itself is a long pre-Christian celebration of the resurrection of spring from the death of winter. And that can be found in the story of Persephone in the Greek mythology, and that's pretty hard to deny that one. You can't say, well, obviously Persephone was a dying and resurrecting figure right there, long prior to the Christian era, at Easter time. Eusebius said that the Therapeutes text short works were allegorizing, which is delving into symbolism. And it seems to be that while the mainstream, the masses, may have taken many of these sacred stories as being literal, and that they're the characters involved in them, if you're talking about stories, that is, there's other ways of allegorizing, not necessarily a story about a person or something, but they may have taken them literally, but behind the scenes there was the intellectual exercise in allegorizing. It was quite common. In fact, we see it expressing itself very profoundly in Gnosticism in later decades. So symbolism and allegory was certainly well known among the better educated of the members of the Roman Empire. And interestingly enough, there's indication that they also incorporated other gods. It wasn't just a Jewish group, that they were Hellenizing or Egyptizing in this case, because they possibly were, it appears that they were also followers of Isis, the goddess Isis, who again is another healing deity. So very important to them would be this healing, this mother healer figure.